Hello, so if you're watching this video, it means that you did not complete your English work last week, or made a small mistake or got confused when you were supposed to be doing it. Adna asked me, and this was a great question, so thank you for asking, Adna, what is narrative writing? She got a little bit confused and she said the video from last week didn't help her. So let me try and explain it in a different way. A narrative is a story. So narrative writing is story writing. You've all done story writing before. It's the part where you explain what happened in a story. So what we were working on in our last lesson was using pronouns in our narrative to avoid repeating the names of people or the names of objects over and over again. You already all do this in your speaking. We discovered, actually, when we first started learning about pronouns, that you all use pronouns all the time. So all I wanted you to do was to write your own story scene using pronouns in the correct way as much as possible. You all started your stories last week. You actually did them with your partner. If you remember, one of you had to be a child who fell asleep at night, and the other one was a toy that came to life. Since you can't work with your partner right now because your partner's not at home with you, what you could do is ask a parent or a sibling or somebody else, like a carer who's at home with you, to act out the scene as much as you remember. What I'm going to show you now is the scene that I did with me and my brother. So we came up with our own story of a child and a toy. I want you to watch that scene and then watch to the end of the video where I show you how I wrote all that scene that happened in my imagination into a narrative. So if you watch that part of the video and see how I wrote my narrative, it will give you some clues and ideas for how you can write your own narrative for your task today. So enjoy this silly scene with me and my brother, and again, watch through right to the end. So I hope you all enjoyed that scene. In my scene, the main characters, you didn't hear their names because obviously the beginning of the story, they're not talking yet. And it's the job of the narrator to tell the reader who those characters are, because obviously we need to figure out what their names are and what they're doing. So I'm going to now write my narrative based on this scene. The name of the girl, I'm going to call her Anya. So the first time that I mention her, I should not use my pronoun yet. Remember, first we need to use the name so we know later in the story who those pronouns refer to. So I'm going to start off by describing what was the beginning of the story. Well, at the beginning of the story, Anya was reading her book. So it was about, what time should Anya go to bed? Let's say it was about 9 p.m. at night, and Anya was finishing the last chapter of, now I could say of Anya's book, but I've already mentioned the name Anya, so now I can use a pronoun. So rather than saying Anya was finishing the last chapter of Anya's book, I could say Anya was finishing the last chapter of her book before bed. Oh, my face is getting in the way, you can't see my writing. It's about 9 p.m. at night, and Anya was finishing the last chapter of her book before bed. She, now I'm going to use another pronoun instead of saying Anya again. When I'm describing what she did next, I'm going to use the word she, the pronoun. She read one final page and then put her book down, and then, actually I don't want to say another and then because I'm going to make a run on. So she read one final page and then put her book down on her bedside table. It's good for me in the next part to try and use a different sentence opener because I'm talking about a sequence of events. I could use a sequencing word, so I could say, then she switched off her lamp and went to sleep. So So you can see I've used she there again, and I know that the person we're talking about is still Anya because I've already mentioned Anya before. I don't need to keep repeating her name. Now I'm going to describe what happened next, where you'll see in the story, hopefully you've already seen it, that the robot came to life. Now the robot doesn't have a name yet, so we're just going to call it the robot. So in the night, the robot started to make strange beeping noises. When I want to talk about the robot in the next sentence, I don't need to say the robot's name again, or I don't need to refer to the noun, the robot. Instead, I can use a pronoun. Now, we don't know that if the robot was a girl or a boy, so I can just use the pronoun it. It was coming to life. Slowly, so a different sentence opener, and again I'm going to use another pronoun, it started walking towards the bed where Anya was sleeping. Now you can see in this sentence I've used the name Anya again. And this is because we haven't mentioned Anya for some time in the story. So if I put a pronoun here, people might be confused about who is she if I just put the pronoun she. So instead I'm going to put her name again just to remind everyone that that's the name of the girl who was sleeping in the bed. So slowly it started walking towards the bed where Anya was sleeping. It, and we know it's the robot again because we've just been talking about the robot. Or I could, if I wanted to, I could mention the robot's name again just to add variety. The robot bent down and slapped her on the legs. Now, when I want to talk about Anya again, I can use a pronoun because we've just mentioned her name recently and it would be too repetitive to say her name again. Suddenly, she was jolted awake. What a surprise it was to see the robot standing there. And you can see that I've ended my little story, my narrative, with a lovely exclamation sentence because I like to practice my exclamation sentences. And I know it's an exclamation sentence because I've said, what a surprise it was. So I've put the verb at the end of the phrase to see the robot standing there. And now I've done a piece of narrative writing using lots of different pronouns to make my writing sound really varied and avoid repetition. And I've even narrated what was going to happen in my scene, or what's happened in the scene that I've invented. Okay, so now you've seen the scene and you've seen how I wrote my own narrative. What you're going to do is you're going to open up from your catch-up work the Google Doc that says narrative task. You can see I've written out my example there so you can look at it, and now I want you to do your own version but using the characters from your story. So not Anya, not the robot. I want you to use the characters from your own story. So do you remember what the name of the child was, and do you remember what the name of the toy was, or what kind of a toy it was? Remember, we already did the direct speech, so in my narrative I haven't yet put in the conversation because we're actually doing the bit before the conversation, so the bit where the child goes to bed or went to bed. So underneath, all you need to do on your Google Doc is start by typing up your story. When you finish typing up your story, it's going to save automatically, and you need to go and submit your work to tell me that you've completed it. If you do submit your work, even though you didn't do it on Friday, I will give you a Ruby, an extra Ruby on class charts if you manage to do this catch-up work before the end of the day today. So remember, on the top right-hand corner, when you go back to your assignment page, you will see your name on your Google Doc and it will say turn in. So you need to click turn in when you finish typing up your Google document. That your Google document is your piece of narrative writing, so your story. Good luck everyone, and I look forward to seeing your work.